Tech hiring is broken, so people say. So I am currently a software engineer at a pretty big tech company. I went through the entire hiring cycle for a couple of summers. I feel like I'm in a pretty unique position to talk about this and to come at it from a really first principles pragmatic viewpoint. Because if you look at social media and Reddit these days, it's just like full apocalypse in terms of just the whole tech hiring cycle. Okay, let's first go into the typical problems that people have with the current tech interview process. So everyone who's gone through a tech interview knows that you pretty much have to practice LeetCode. And the problem with LeetCode is that this is, for example, one of the first questions I did back when I was a university student, number of islands, and it teaches you how to use DFS, how to traverse through, I guess, like a 2D binary grid, and essentially shows you basic principles of for loop, DFS, runtime optimizations, things like that. And yes, it does show that you have a basic understanding of data structures, a basic understanding of how to code. However, in real life work scenarios, you will never see my code like this. Why? Because a lot of the algorithms in which we get tested for LeetCode is not actually applicable to actual work. We care about encapsulation, we care about having really clean code that is reproducible in the future. We care about having good test coverage, making sure that everything is easy to read and well documented. And a 30-minute LeetCode practice problem doesn't really test those types of fundamentals. And a lot of the algorithms you learn in LeetCode, quite frankly, you don't actually have to use at work. Like, for goodness sake, I don't remember the last time I've had to reverse a linked list other than for an interview problem. A lot of people think that this is an applicability to work problem. I think that's part of the problem, but I don't think that's the main problem. For example, I went on Google right now and I just searched number of applicants to FANG. FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google. I mean, there's other big companies now, but these are some good examples. Receive a massive volume of applications, with estimates suggesting around 50,000 resumes weekly, and acceptance rates are extremely low, often under 1%. Example, Google. Around 3 million people applied to Google in 2020, with only 20,000 being hired, resulting in a 0.67% acceptance rate. Amazon. It's estimated that Amazon receives a large number of applications, with some reports suggesting 1 million applications during a hiring week in September 2021. Okay, so what does this mean? So I really wanted to take a pragmatic view on this because going into Reddit or things like that, I think from an applicant perspective, I definitely understand the frustration, especially if you have a software engineering job, because you're like, LeetCode, it doesn't actually match what I actually do on a day-to-day basis for work. But this problem is not just an applicability to work problem. This is also a scaling problem for these FANG companies. That's why you see for a lot of these big companies, they ask these more standardized technical problems more. And sometimes for the smaller unicorn companies, you get some really hard take-home assignments or really tricky ones that I guess are more fair towards what you actually do on a day-to-day basis, but are trickier because it's not as standardized. And the reason for that is, first of all, for the bigger companies, look at how many applicants they're getting. They can't afford to give each person a really complicated take-home assignment. And the second part is that these big companies need something fair and equitable. I'm not saying that LeetCode is the best way to do things, but it is at least equitable and quantifiable in the fact that, did you solve the problem? Did you explain how you solve the problem step by step to the interviewer? Did you talk about runtime? All of those basic things in terms of solving a problem where you guide the interviewer, they can be standardized within a rubric. And I will go into detail for other industries, the ways they've tried to solve this scaling problem and how to make it fair and equitable. I mean, I used to be a pre-med student and I tried to get into med school, and the way they solve the scaling problem is quite fascinating as well. But before we go into that, I kind of want to talk about the second part, which is how equitable LeetCode is. Because yes, I did say that you can have a somewhat standardized rubric for how you can mark people at LeetCode. It is, however, not perfect. And that's another, I guess, huge qualm that people have against LeetCode. Because what's ended up happening is that right now it's like a huge tech interview arms race. So why is it a huge tech interview arms race? Well, if I were to just go into Google right now and search up how many LeetCode problems were there back in the 2000s. I just search up the tech interview evolution. In the early stages, they talked about general knowledge. Okay, this is not really what I was looking for, Google searching the tech interviews evolution, so I'll just give some examples anecdotally. I know some people who were a part of the tech industry in the early 2000s as well as the 2010s, and there were not that many LeetCode problems. Like total in terms of LeetCode problems, there might have been like 100. And now if you go into LeetCode, there is how many problems in the database? Like over 2,000? Look, just for array questions, there's almost 2,000 problems just related to arrays. So essentially, it's turned into this arms race where people join boot camps, they're now using AI, they have a bunch of study tools to get them really good at LeetCode, so they're better prepared for LeetCode. And then the companies are like, oh no, like our problem base is getting figured out, and we can no longer deal with this scaling problem because now more people are passing the interviews. So now we just need to increase our problem bank and make it either more difficult or make it more diverse so that more people have to go through different things. And then it's like an arm race between, companies trying to figure out more and more ways to distinguish candidates, and then candidates having better tools to deal with these interview problems. So yeah, I guess there is a never-ending arms race that is currently occurring. But I honestly think that at this point, there are actually quite a few benefits with how tech interviews are conducted today. And the reason I think this way is because I have been a part of some of the processes in other industries, and trust me, it is just as difficult and perhaps just as disastrous as what it is currently in the tech industry. But first, let's talk about some of the positives. Number one, because technical interviews can be done in half an hour to an hour, and because you can have a pretty standardized rubric and a pretty standardized interview process, it is actually easier to get an interview at prestigious companies compared to other industries. For example, I was a pre-med candidate for medical school, and because their process is so strenuous, they don't actually give that many interviews. Like, you have to do your MCAT, you have to have really good grades, you need to have letters of referrals. That's just to apply to get an interview for medical school. And they don't give that many interviews because they have to fly you out. You have to spend like a day there going through their behavioral interview process, going through different medical, going through a whole bunch of medical case studies. And then it's like a whole couple days process where you go through interviews like that. And then when you become a doctor, in Canada at least, you go through this CARMS matching process where you go to like different hospitals and then you do interviews there. And then it's essentially like a week-long cycle where you're going to like different places and you're interviewing in different places. So just because of the sheer fact that interview process is so long and strenuous means that not as many people get interviews. So the good thing here is that because LeetCode doesn't take so long, more people will actually get interviews because of this. The second positive of having LeetCode problems like this is that there is some wiggle room for false positives. Obviously, people have a lot of thoughts about this, but the one benefit with like the performance-based review process is that you can have false positives. What that means is that if the interview process was not perfect and some people came in but they weren't actually great engineers, at least they got the chance to prove themselves, and if they didn't do well, then that's okay. They get a severance and they move on. They maybe get better and move on to a different company. And again, this is one of the reasons why I think for the tech industry, even though it is perhaps getting more and more difficult, it's definitely not as bad as some of the other industries and how they deal with the scaling problem. And this is what I mean. For example, in medical school, to apply to medical school in the US, you need a bachelor's degree, good grades, usually near perfect grades, a strong MCAT score, strong letters of recommendation from like professors, different research programs, things like that, a compelling personal statement, and potentially a secondary application interview. I remember for one of my applications for medical school, you need to write a personal statement of your top 10 experiences. And that's not easy to write, by the way. Like, people spend all summer doing that, and then they spend all summer figuring out their MCAT, because every year, the medical schools only go through an interview process once for their next year's candidates. So that's how medical school chooses to deal with their scaling problem, because so many people apply to medical school, and it's like similar numbers, like not a lot of people get into medical school as well. Well, for investment banking, it's the same thing. Basically, from my understanding for investment banking, although I'm not like a huge expert, they have multiple rounds of behavior interviews, phone screens, and they give you technical interviews, which is of like how you can do like investment banking case studies, things like that, which you can make an argument is closer to what they do at the job, but they also go through like a lengthy interview process to essentially filter down and deal with the scaling problem. Consulting, same thing. Basically, you go through behavior interviews and then you go through case studies as well. And then, of course, for lawyers, they have to go through the LSAT, law school, things like that. Accountants, they have to go through CPA, a whole bunch of accreditations. Same thing with engineering. For engineering, I think there's like some petroleum engineering certification, accounting and CPA exams. So again, there's a lot of these accreditations to essentially give you more and more credibility as you go down your career. And also, these are for years at a time. Medical school, you're there for like many years. Law school, you're there for many years. A lot of those accounting exams, P engineering, you're studying for like many, many months to do those things. The one thing about software engineering that I really enjoy is that it's very democratic. Like, I mean, a lot of people who join these big tech companies, some of them don't even have a bachelor's degree. They just need to know how to code. In addition, tech stack is always evolving. So the thing is like, because of this, because of the fact that people are learning all the time, the new people who are coming in have just as much of a competitive advantage than the older folks because it's an ever-growing industry process. For me, at least, going through the med school gauntlet, I have to say, software engineering, with all of its imperfections, is at least better than a lot of those industries. So I really wanted to give a balanced take on this. Despite all of the flaws with the tech interview hiring process and the fact that, yes, LeetCode is definitely very exhausting, I will agree with that. I still think there are a lot of merits with the way the process is done today, purely because of the fact that more people are able to get interviews and there are checks and balances along the way to allow people to enter the industry. With that being said, the scaling problem as well as the arms race is still a huge issue. And I've honestly thought about this a lot, and these are some of the solutions that I think currently work for today. The first thing is that I would encourage more internship opportunities. Instead of a 1-hour LeetCode interview process, you get them to essentially go through a paid internship, do a project, and then at the end of that, reflect on whether or not they should get a return full-time offer. I still think that that works extremely well, and we should do more of that. Not only for students, I think you should just open up internships for everyone, even if you've graduated. And I think they do that. There are some, I know definitely there are some like junior apprenticeship programs in certain companies if you have already graduated, where you get to stay at the company for like 6 months, 12 months, and then at the end they do some reflection on that and then decide to give you a return offer or not. That works really well as a model, but then you go back to the scaling problem. How many can you take on? How many can you actually give internships for? The other part is that, yes, I do agree that a lot of the LeetCode algorithms are not typically used for day-to-day work. So we can definitely, in my opinion, eliminate some of the less used algorithms just to make some of the studying more focused. And if this causes more people to pass the LeetCode portion of the interview, then we should test more on system design, because system design is a huge part of software engineering jobs. And in the future, in particular, where AI can do a lot of the sort of basic coding, system design is going to be really important for an engineer to really understand how different components fit together and how you can deal with all of those things. And there's definitely a lot of resources out there. For example, this one that talks about system design, things like load balancing, different types of databases, database sharding. These are all important concepts that I think are very useful at a bigger organization in particular. And then I also feel like you should have a split between new grads and more experienced devs. For example, for new grads, yes, I do think maybe it is reasonable to do some more LeetCode problems just to at least test that they know how to do like a for loop, know some of the basic algorithms. But for more experienced engineers, people who have had a lot of experience in the industry, who are already senior engineers, I don't necessarily think that asking them a LeetCode question is the best way to test them. Perhaps having a more project-based and portfolio-based review of what they did at the prior company and having a discussion and cultural fit around that is a better solution. But then we go back to the fact that there's more subjectivity there, and if you ask people just about their projects, things like that, there's less opportunity for there to be a standardized rubric. So let me be quiet because I also don't have a great solution for all of this. And that just goes to show you how challenging it is to have something that is scalable, equitable for everyone, gives opportunity to different types of people, and at the same time, not encourage a huge arms race among the people trying to get in. It's honestly a very difficult problem. So I am both sympathetic to me when I was a student and all of the students today going through this process, but also, I guess, to the whole hiring process because it is very, very tricky. But yeah, going to the initial clickbaity title of Is Tech Hiring Broken? I guess you can say it's broken, but that would mean that all of the other industries where they have this scaling problem, their hiring process is broken as well. And out of all of the broken systems, I would say that tech has one of the lesser broken systems if we're comparing it to being a lawyer, being an investment banker, being a doctor. Okay, those are my thoughts. I really tried to give a sort of balanced take on this. And yeah, I'm curious to hear what your guys' thoughts are in the comments below as well.